Assalamualaikum. We have 39, almost 40 participants. I would like to welcome all participants to the Action Research on Pandemic Pedagogy Webinar. Welcome. Professor.
Waalaikumsalam, Doktor.
Hai. Assalamualaikum semua. Kita masih menunggu Profesor untuk masuk. Bila Profesor masuk, kita akan bermula. I would like to thank all of you for joining us. I really appreciate because today is Saturday and I know it's your holiday. And I really appreciate that you can join the webinar today with Professor Whitehead, one of the legend in action research. Yeah. Nama beliau ni memang selalu saya quote lah dalam thesis saya, selalu sebut Whitehead. Saya tak pernah berjumpa. Alhamdulillah, hari ni pertama kali saya bercakap secara face to face, rasa macam tak percaya dan rasa gementar rasanya. Berdebar-debar tadi bila berjumpa orang yang saya kagumi, tiba-tiba saya berjumpa pada malam ini. Alhamdulillah, first time for me. Untuk makluman, I'm the first one in Malaysia to do action research for PhD level. Way back in 2000, the year 2000 when I did my PhD. Nama Whitehead ni memang selalu saya gunakan dalam banyak paper saya. Alhamdulillah. Just now, I was with him in the breakout room. So I'm waiting for Dr. Satira and also Professor Whitehead. Tadi saya telah berkenalan dengan Prof. Jadi selepas ini saya akan memanggil Prof sebagai Jack saja. Saya dah minta izin tadi untuk lebih mesra lah. Jadi saya akan panggil Jack lah. Okay, thank you so much for everyone. Nozarina.
Dr. Zaila, we are already in, yeah?
Welcome, Doctor.
Yeah, we are already in.
Okay. Jadi I think I can start now. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and a very good evening to all the participants. Welcome, and also we'd like to welcome Professor Whitehead to our Action Research on Pandemic Pedagogy Webinar. I wish I can, I'm very happy, I'm very excited today to have Jack with us tonight. Okay, today is Saturday. And today is a holiday for all teachers, and I really appreciate all the participants that joined us tonight. Okay, let me begin by introducing myself again, Professor. I am Dr. Zaila Zainuddin. I'm a senior lecturer, Professor Cemerlang from IPG Campus Raja Malewa. I'm the lead researcher for the Action Research on Pandemic Pedagogy project. And I also would like to introduce the other two co-researchers, Dr. Satira binti Haji Ahmad, and also Dr. Muhammad Syafiq Aiman. Okay. As we know, the coronavirus COVID-19 outbreak is causing a lot of disruption in education globally. Malaysia announced the closure of school and other education institutions on 18 March recently with less than 26-hour notice, in an attempt to slow the spread of the disease. This has impacted just below 5 billion students in the country. Despite the fact we are disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic, unlike any time in the past, we have the ability to continue education even when schools close. Alhamdulillah, Dr. Satira, Dr. Syafiq and me, we took the opportunity to create this project in the beginning of April to provide a virtual professional development for educators in Malaysia during the COVID-19 pandemic. So far, we have conducted, for your information, Jack, we have conducted 3 workshops via Google Meet. We also communicate through Google Classroom and Telegram. And our mission is to provide support for them teachers to conduct action research. Alhamdulillah, thus far, we have more than 20 educators in Malaysia across various levels of institutions who are actively undertaking action research projects on distance teaching and learning during this pandemic. For example, I would like to share. One of our participants is a primary school teacher who has invented the Ruai classroom in the rural area of Sarawak, which have very limited internet, or most of the areas have no internet at all. Ruai is actually a place in the longhouse for them to do the home teaching and learning activities. We also have secondary school teacher who teach vocational subject in making bread, and she has invented the durian donut bake sale project among indigenous students in Perak to promote entrepreneurship. And we have many more action research projects in progress with impressive pedagogical interventions. In this project, we wish to document educational stories, the ways that educators in Malaysia cope with the challenges of distance teaching and learning during the COVID-19 pandemic. The educational stories can be referred to the idea of a living educational theory as an individual's explanation of their educational influences in their own learning, in the learning of others, and in learning of the social formations that influence, practice, and understanding. Having said all that, let me now introduce our special speaker, Professor Whitehead. Professor Whitehead is the visiting professor of education, University of Cumbria, United Kingdom. He started his profession as a science teacher, just like me, I'm a science teacher also, in London comprehensive schools, and then employed as a lecturer in education at University of Bath. He had also been the adjunct professor at Liverpool Hope University. Professor Whitehead actively involved with various educational research activities. He used to chair British Educational Research Association, BERA, and had been appointed as a visiting professor in various universities worldwide, including United States of America and China. Congrats, Jack. He had conducted workshops on action research, living theory research, coaching, mentoring, and professional development in the Europe, North and South America, Africa, and Asia. I'm particularly pleased to be sharing this webinar because Professor Whitehead is one of the pioneers of action research who has established, way back in 1989, the inclusion of I in the research methodology and use of action reflection cycles in the inquiry, how do I improve my practice? So before we begin, we want to keep this webinar as interactive as possible, and therefore, please make good use of the chat function on Zoom or YouTube by sharing your views and questions for this discussion. Just to remind everyone, this webinar is being recorded and will be available after the event. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Whitehead to share on his originated ideas on living educational theory approach to action research and pedagogical practices. So over to you, Jack.
Yes, thank you very much, Celia. That's a really good introduction. Thank you. And I'm delighted to be talking with you today because I've been trying to work now for literally over 50 years to promote the action research approach to professional development in pedagogy. And I just want to check just some ideas with you all, because it feels to me that all of you working together in Malaysia will be able to enhance professionalism of educators and teachers in Malaysia. And it's very exciting that you've got Zelia as the first action research doctorate in Malaysia, and you've now got others coming through. But they all start with teachers like you and I in the classroom actually asking questions of the kind, how do I improve what I am doing? It's a really crucial question. And it took me several years before I could get universities to accept that the I could appear in a research question. And now it's quite common that if you go onto my website it's actionresearch.net, you will see over 50 doctoral degrees that have been awarded in different parts of the world with people asking those I questions. And not only that, but they've all been focused on what is educational. And if we can move the slide down one, please, because it's that point about what is educational that all of you will have been focused, I think, on learning. So you're all used to thinking about the word and the language of learning. But the point about making sure that it is educational is that not all learning is educational. You've got to actually put values that really matter, that count as improvement. So this is why we talk about values of human flourishing. Those values that you hold, that you believe will help to improve the world. So this idea of values is so important, to really focus on what are the values that you use to give meaning and purpose to your life in education, and that help to change the learning into something that is educational. But I do hope if you've got questions on what I'm dealing now with these slides, you'll put them in the chat section and we can actually deal with them later. Could I have the next slide, please? Yeah, that's it. That is the stress about not all learning is this is it. Now, what I'm interested in, could you go back, please? Because there's a slide on action research. Could you go back or? Well, let me just go through as I try and find the idea about action research, which I think many of you are familiar with. Now, when I pioneered quite a lot of work on action research in the United Kingdom, I actually found that all the teachers I was working with, and I think you'll check this yourselves, is that when you're trying to improve something, that what you do is you actually imagine what will be an improvement, that you create what we call an action plan. And as you're acting to try to improve what you are doing, you gather data so that you can make a judgment about how effective you are being in the learning of your students. And then you evaluate how effective you are being in relation to the values you hold. And these are called action reflection cycles. You actually act, there it is, what is action research? Okay, form of self-study practitioner research, where all of you, I think, will have been asking yourself these questions a lot in your professional career. How do I improve what I am doing in my professional practice? Now, the reason that I developed the idea of a living educational theory was that I found that in my action research, it didn't include producing an explanation of my educational influence in my learning. That the action research was excellent for actually helping me to solve my problem, my practical problem, using action reflection cycles where I would say, okay, look, I have a concern. Things aren't going as well as they could be. So I imagine what I'm going to do to improve it. I act on it and gather data. I make a judgment about what I'm doing to check if I'm being effective. And then I evaluate my practice and change what I'm doing. Now that's the action reflection cycle, which I think all of you will be familiar with, but it doesn't go far enough if you want to actually make a contribution to educational theory and knowledge, which as professionals, I'm claiming that your responsibility, part of it, is to make that contribution as a practitioner researcher, not only to improve what you're doing with the children or your students, but also to bring your knowledge into the academy for accreditation so that it improves the professional knowledge base. So that is why I try to convince people that we develop action research, but we go on to actually, could we go to the next slide, please? We go on to improve the knowledge base through our own living educational theories. Now, just see if this makes sense to you, because I believe that each one of us can actually explain the educational influence that you are having, not only in your own learning, but in the learning of other people. Just as Zayla was giving you those 3 aspects of living educational theory in her introduction. You explain your educational influence in your own learning, in the learning of others, usually your students, but also in the learning of what we call the social formation that influence your practice. Now, most of you, and in particular Zala, when Zala came to try to do action research for the first time, the universities were not really open to the eye coming into the research, to the researcher studying her own practice. And Zala will explain how Bridget Somak, one of the pioneers again of action research in the UK, came out to Malaysia and supported Zala's proposal. Now that is so important that that is what is called educating, having an educational influence in the learning of the social formation. That is a university. That many of you might get that kind of resistance. It's still there in some parts of the world. And educating the social formation means trying to get it understood that this kind of research is academically legitimate and it can reach high levels of scholarship and rigor, which if you get onto Zala's PhD, you will see that, those criteria have been met. Okay, so that's very important, that in terms of not only your own educational influence in your learning, your explanation of your educational influence in the learning of your students and perhaps colleagues, but also the social formation. And if you all work together after these projects, you could actually enhance professionalism in Malaysia by influencing the nature of the knowledge base of education in the universities. Now, the explanatory principles, this is also very, very important when we come on to try to explain your educational influence. Now, most of you, I don't believe, will be used to using a value. If we take values that matter to you. Values like freedom, like justice, like democracy as a procedure. All of those are values that you can use to explain why you do what you do. Now, I'm going to say something I think you might find a little strange. And it is that I think the majority of you here today actually do love what you do. The idea of love is not something that in many universities has been accepted as an explanatory principle. But if you think about why you do what you do, how have you sustained your passion over so many years? Then one of the only reasons that I think you'll be able to give is that you really do love what you do. And to bring love as a principle, motivating principle, an explanatory principle is very important. And if you go into the doctoral theses on my website, you'll see that love comes into several of the titles. One would be love at work. Another that's just gone through a Canadian university is all about being loved into learning. So I think you will need to talk together about the values that really motivate you. And don't shy away from bringing values in that you often don't talk about and that haven't come into the so-called academic theories. Now, this is why we try to bring in what we call a validation group. That as you explain your educational influence, it could just be criticized as being just subjective and anecdotal. Okay, that's just a story that you tell, which doesn't count as research because it's not really rigorous and you haven't subjected it to really rigorous criticism in what we call a validation group. And so what you could all do is help your peers to form perhaps 3 to 8 people who will actually respond to your explanations of your influence in the classroom. And those are called a validation group. Could you, next slide, please? And you can ask your validation group to actually ask you questions about the improvements that are taking place. I don't want to go into it now, but if you contact me or Seth asks, I can let you have more information about how the validation group helps you to improve the comprehensibility of what you've written, the evidence that you're offering to back up your claims, the way you engage with the socio-cultural and socio-historical influences, and the idea of authenticity, where you show that you're living your values as fully as possible. Now this one about improving pedagogy in teaching, learning and assessment has actually just been published in Educational Action Researcher. So that's only just come out this last week, and you'll be able to actually access that and have a look at how I and others are explaining our practice in terms of our pedagogy and the pedagogical action research that we use in higher education to improve our practice. But we are accounting to you, we're accounting to others through the explanations we're offering as we build up our global professional knowledge base. Now, as I say, I do hope if there are questions that are coming, you'll put them into the chat and that we can actually deal with them later. And if we can't do it today, I'll ask Seth or Zayla to let me have those and I can write later on so we keep a conversation going as you develop your inquiries and spread them. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Now, what I think you could all do is actually produce what we call your living posters. Now, these you can actually access from that URL on this PowerPoint. On this slide here, if Seth clicks on that and it is live, all of those come up, okay? Now, those are all communities and individuals all over the world that have actually submitted their living posters so that you can share them, you can develop them. Now, on the far left, can you see halfway down the Malaysian research group? Yeah, now the Malaysian research group, that only came through yesterday. And you have been added to the homepage of Living Theory Researchers so that now we can start to find out more about what is happening in the Malaysian research group. If you click on the URL where it says Malaysian research group, you will be able to access the living posters that have been submitted. Now, you've got there communities all over the world. On the far right, the most effective one is called the Network of Education Action Researchers in Ireland. That's the one. And that one is really worth going into because it began in 2006 and 2007 when 4 women at the University of Limerick all got their living theory doctorates. And since then, over the past 14 years, they've actually worked together to create a network of educational action researchers in Ireland. They've published 4 books, all the details are on their living posters, and they have just got a special interest group accepted with the Educational Studies Association of Ireland. And you could do this in Malaysia. You could actually come together to actually just look at how those 4 women have actually worked together to change what counts as educational research, both within their Action Research Network and also now within their National Educational Research Association. So that is what I'm hoping that you'll be quite inspired by. And in the middle, when you get this, you could click on how to create and share your living poster. And I know some of you have already submitted that yesterday. It's now on the homepage, and all of you could just generate your living poster to show what it is you're doing, how you're doing it, and you can join this global community of educational action researchers who are sharing their living educational theories. Okay, can we get next slide, please? Okay. Now, this is just, it's just something, just in addition, and then I'll just pause and I'll see if there are any questions that have come through. It's just that this person, Joy Mounter, Joy Mounter is what's called the Master's Lead at the Learning Institute in Cornwall in the United Kingdom. And Joy has got legitimated at Newman University the first living theory master's degree. So that is, and the second one is just going through hopefully this next week. And you can access those on the web and just have a look what you might put forward into universities to see if they will now accept for professional development whole living theory master's degrees. And they use the action research cycle. And that is where Joy is demonstrating how these living posters that she calls living interactive posters are a form of assessment that can be used in a living theory masters, along with other forms of assessment, but you can actually access those from that URL. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause and just ask if there are questions that you would like to ask, or if there's anybody that has got prepared questions, I can actually respond to. You'll have to unmute, Zayla.
Okay, maybe Dr. Satira can share her thoughts. Please, Dr. Satira. Unmute.
Thank you, Dr. Zaila, and thank you, Jack, for the fruitful sharing. Actually, it's a relief to know that we are with people who hold the same values like us. And thank God our passion towards action research is still sustained until now, despite the challenges that we face in Malaysia. And I'm so proud that to be in the living theory community, that our faces are there, Dr. Zaila. So
yes,
glad.
The homepage. I'm so excited.
Jack, outside there, there are many more teacher educators, university lecturers who still do not have faith in AR. In the case of teachers trying to do action research for their masters and PhD, they face a lot of challenges because they cannot register in certain universities that they intend to further their study. So what advice would you give to these universities, or the if I can say, the orthodox lecturers and professors who still do not see the potential of action research as academically legitimate work? What would you advise them?
No, it's a really important question, this. And over the past 40 years, we have worked in many countries and many universities to try to encourage the acceptance of those kind of questions. Now, in Malaysia, what you could do is, and we can talk about this now over the next few weeks, it is to just mount a campaign, which you can do nationally. We did it within our local universities, first of all, but then I became president of the British Educational Research Association. So my presidential address focused on it, putting the I into research. We've done the same in Canada, in South Africa. We're actually looking in different countries where we've had to contact individual lecturers who might be prepared to supervise these kinds of research. Now, internationally, this is now so well known. There are international journals which have got very high status on action research. So we can actually let people know in the universities where there is resistance that, look, this is a very important innovation over the last 40 years. People are getting very high levels of award for doing this kind of research. Now, you can also put tutors who are not really sure about it in touch with other tutors in other universities that have been successful. So, for example, one of the last PhDs to go through was awarded 2 weeks ago. It was by Arianna Briganti. She's Italian, but working in Albania. And her living theory was my living theory of international development. The internal supervisor did not actually understand about living theory, but I and one other person provided support So Ariana was being supported by her supervisor from the Open University, where she got her master's. And there are ways that you can provide support now within universities who haven't got supervisors who have got a successful supervision of these kind of inquiries. So it's a matter now of putting people in touch with each other and showing them what has been accomplished all the way around the world. But let's keep in touch with that, because I think we can help.
Yeah, and look like we have to work harder, Dr. Zaila.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
Zaila, you'll have to unmute.
Yes, our role is to influence the educational system in Malaysia. How we can influence, that's the magic word today.
Yes, yeah, very
yeah.
much. It is crucial.
Improving ourselves,
yeah.
But at the same time, we influence the community, we influence the country, the education of our country.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that is the in a nutshell that I got from your presentation just now.
Yeah.
And we also want Dr. Shafiq to share his thoughts. Dr. Shafiq, I'm so proud of him because he was my ex-student, you know, during the degree.
Dr. I have one more before Dr. Shafiq.
Okay.
Yeah, can you just, because I have been involved in editing the local journal for teachers, and it is proud to say that many teachers are interested in writing AR.
Yeah.
However, the intervention, I personally think that the intervention is, I don't want to use the word up to the standard, but I think it's quite colloquial, quite, something that is not innovative enough, I would say. That is my personal opinion. But perhaps you can share with us what is expected, from the intervention shared by the teachers.
Yes.
How do you find, a good intervention, something that is worth sharing in international journals and also presentation?
Well, in a locality, Satira, I would not start with the international journals. What we did in Canada, for example, one of my doctoral students was the superintendent of schools in one of the Grand Erie Board. And I used to go over there and run professional development courses for the teachers, whilst the superintendent was studying for her PhD. Now, she's called Jackie DeLong. And Jacqueline has produced, over a course of 4 or 5 years, 9 volumes of what's called Passion in Professional Practice, which actually begins with teachers who are not registered for a master's degree, but actually go into how do I improve what I am doing? And those questions are all available on the web. And then they move up, we move them up into master's degrees, and then we've got doctorates. There are over 50 doctorates now that have been awarded, but start with the classroom. For example, when I started as a science teacher, I wanted to get inquiry learning going when the children asked questions. You know, I've got so many illustrations now in those Passion in Professional Practice books. So Satira, I can actually let you have the references for some of those so you can see each of the inquiries that the teachers are undertaking that you know, we all felt were worthwhile questions.
I hope the participants will take notes, yeah? The audience, yeah, please. Okay, thank you, Jack. Okay. To you, Shafiq.
Hello, I think I just want to summarize based on the discussion that we had here. I think everyone has the same problem. That's why my intended when I started my PhD journey is trying to prove that I can do PhD in education research. That's what I did in Institute of Education, UCL. So I think everyone will be agree that there was a very remarkable and inspiring talk by the Prof Whitehead that we had today. So because I have been admirer of his work since I started my own research journey. In this particular talk, I am particularly interested the ways to produce the living educational theory. Because when we talk about educational theory, we normally refer to Lev Vygotsky or John Piaget or Benjamin Bloom or even Howard Gardner. However, educational living theory really has opening up educational perspective, that theories are not such a religious book that we have to follow just by its own principle. Because the traditional view of a theory is a general explanatory framework, which is we can generate descriptions and explanation for empirical observed by their regularities and the behavior of individual cases. I think we should all agree that action research is about becoming a researcher, and that means also we are becoming the theories. And I think we should not listen to people who tell you that action research cannot generate theory, because I think we all can, and we all should. And it's not that difficult, because as a broad definition, as what Prof Whitehead said, a theory means explanation that can be tested, and everybody can and should explain what they're doing. Because, for example, like if you know John Hattie, in his most influential publication, Visible Learning, has listed a lot of effective pedagogies to teaching and learning. However, for example, in some areas on the ground, that his work may not sensitive to what is going on in local setting. How can we implement, for example, in the rural areas of Malaysia, in the Borneo or Sarawak and Sabah, who doesn't have all those what we call facilities? So only teachers know and understand the context of their own practice, and nobody should come and tell them what they should do. Yeah. Thus, I think we should really have learned not to listen to people that to tell you that actually it's just about professional development. Because I think educational living theory to actually research is not just about becoming a better teacher. It's also about creating a new knowledge and generating theory. Right. Thank you so much. Dr. Zaila, over to you.
You have to unmute.
Well said, Dr. Shafiq. Yeah, because in education, no one rule fit everybody. Yes, I agree with that. Before we go on, we have questions also from the participants. I would like to, before we allow the participants to ask questions, I also get one question here from the YouTube, from Wani. She said, how to actually motivate to start doing action research?
Yeah, I found that for me, there was no problem with the teachers that I have worked with, because all of the teachers, it may not be the same in Malaysia, but all of the teachers that I worked with really do have the interests of their pupils at heart. When I say that they love what they do, they want to do the best for their pupils. And so that question, how do I improve what I am doing, is a great motivator. And if you don't go in, as Seth was saying that you've got all the answers because you've got all this theory, and you pay attention to what the teacher themselves wants to improve, and your language is focused on what it is the teacher values and what they want to improve, I've always found that actually helps with their motivation.
Yes, I think if we do really love our profession, you really love what we do, I think that can motivate us to do action research. Okay, now let us allow the participants for our project to ask their questions. First, let me welcome Cikgu Naima. She's a special education teacher from Perak.
Okay.
Hello, Professor.
Hello.
And hello, everyone. My name is Nur Naima. I am a special education teacher from Perak. I am currently undertaking action research project on teaching visualization to sustain learning interest for a long period of time among special needs students with Down syndrome. Professor, you have talked a lot about values such as social justice, love, care, inclusion that we should draw on the values we hold to guide our research process. My question is, how can we recognize a personally held value, for example, integrity in ourselves or others, as we engage in educational living theory approach and practitioner action research? And that's all my question. Thank you.
Yes, I always recognize that sense of integrity because people almost always experience themselves as what we call living contradictions. Now, what that means is that when you're in practice, you're not fully living the values that you believe in, that you want to improve, you want to do something better. So you can actually follow someone like yourself who is interested in inclusion, who is actually trying to use visualization to improve the learning of some of your students. And by following you through an action reflection process where you're trying to live your value as fully as possible, that is where we judge the authenticity and integrity. Okay? Are you okay?
Okay, Naima, are you okay with that?
Yes, thank you, Prof.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Okay.
We also have another participant here. He is one of my students, just graduated from the Raja Malewa campus, Teacher Education Institute. I would like to welcome Mr. Katirasan all the way from Pahang.
Hello.
Hello.
A great welcome to Professor Whitehead.
Thank you.
Prof, let me introduce myself. I'm Katirasan. I'm a physical education teacher in primary school for the students within a range of 7 to 12 years old. My question is, we know that questions of validity are fundamentally important in all research which is concerned with the generation and testing of theory. Yeah. After more than 30 years, we still hear the criticism of action research that the quality of traditional research cannot be achieved if lay persons do the research. What are the standards of judgment in order to test a claim to educational knowledge?
You, I think, can use two kinds of standard which can make sure that the research meets very high intellectual standards. Now, the first one comes out of the work of the critical theorist called Jürgen Habermas. And Jürgen Habermas claims there are 4 standards that we use to understand each other, that we ask to improve the comprehensibility of our explanations. We make sure that the evidence, and this satisfies any positivist scientist, that the evidence that is offered is actually sufficient to actually support the assertions or the claims. The third one, no positivist scientist has to meet, but it is that the action researcher and living theorist integrate insights from sociocultural and socio-historical theory to actually show how the social formations are influencing your practice and what you do. And Habermas's 4th criteria is authenticity, to ensure that you're living your values that you claim to hold as fully as possible. Now, those are the ones that Habermas says about validity. Now, the second set, and if Seth would like this, I can send you the reference for one of my students from Singapore who used the second set of criteria from a man called Richard Winter, and he used 6 standards of rigor to ensure that your educational action research and living theory meets the very high academic standards, not to subject this criticism that they're just anecdotal or subjective. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of this, but they're all well defined in Peggy Leong's work about dialectical and reflexive critique, risk, plural structure, multiple resource, theory, practice, transformation. These are 6 criteria that you can apply to your explanations to ensure that they're rigorous in the traditional academic sense.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Okay. Mute.
For your information, Jack, Mr. Katarasan has won many innovation awards. He actively doing his action research, and some of the innovations has won many awards for national and also national level in Malaysia.
Excellent.
So congrats to Katarasan.
Yes,
He's
excellent.
now just finished his PhD. He's struggling to do. He tried to do action research for PhD. However, it's very difficult for him to get approval to do action research.
Okay. Well,
okay.
Yeah.
I also would like to welcome one of the participants from our group. She's a lecturer from the private university. Welcome, Miss Farah Damia.
Hi, good afternoon, Prof Whitehead. I am Farah from Utah International University, currently undertaking action research project on teaching geometry via GeoGebra mobile application to improve distance learning in higher education during the COVID-19 pandemic. So Prof, I have a question to ask you. So based on one of your papers, you have written about self-study. Action research is an approach to research that put us, the practitioner, at the center of the research. As a lecturer, myself in a higher educational institution, what would be your advice to us as a practitioner, specifically as a lecturer, researcher, to actually do this research to gain academic accreditation? Thank you, Prof.
Okay, now what I can do is I can send you the details from Canada of people that have actually done this in relation to, one of them is called Judy McBride, and she started in 1999 with me on a master's program, and she went through that action reflection cycle. So what I would do is to start with your practice now. You know your concern, you know you've got an issue and you want to improve it. Go through the action reflection cycle, but then produce the explanation of your educational influence in your own learning and the learning of others, and then share that with your group. Now, what happens then is that, for example, if it came to me, and I'd be prepared to do this, I could make suggestions about ideas that you could then integrate within your account that could actually meet very high academic standards of engagement with the literature. But that is how I would actually begin. And as I say, I've got some people in Canada that are already just beginning, and the ones in Ireland, the people in Ireland have already worked on that. Mary Glenn, as doctorate, was on that, and it's a lovely doctorate. But Marin is getting a paper that's just coming out this week in Educational Action Research, the Journal of Educational, well, it's a Journal of Living Theories. That'll be published this week. It's freely available, and you'll see in Maureen's paper, she actually does go some way to answering your question. So but please do come back to me, in the days or the weeks ahead to follow up your question, and I'll do what I can to give you some more information. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Prof.
Okay. Unmute.
I'm so sorry. We have one teacher actually all the way from Sarawak. I really hope his internet is okay. Our another participant, Mr. Safwan, he's a math teacher all the way from Sarawak. We really hope that his internet is okay now. Mr. Safwan, are you there? Is Mr.
Yes,
Safwan?
you unmute. Yeah, needs to unmute.
Are you in, Mr. Safwan?
He is, but he's not unmuted.
Oh, okay.
But does he know how to unmute?
I think just a few seconds.
You need to click the microphone icon.
Oh, I think he has a trouble a bit. Maybe we can continue with other questions,
Okay.
and then we come back to someone.
Yeah.
Okay, actually, for your information, Prof, we have about 120 viewers from the YouTube, and we have about 56 participants here in Zoom. application.
You've done really well. It's very impressive. It really
Okay.
is. Yeah.
Okay. Welcome, Mr.
Is ready
Safwan.
now.
There you are.
Okay,
Yes.
okay,
Go on.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry for
No,
the
it's okay.
technical issue. My name is Safwan. I am mathematics primary teachers. My action research is about project-based learning during pandemic. So I read from one of the article from the internet. Action research generalizability is very limited, and my question is it possible to generalize from action research? And if not, how can action research add to knowledge? Thank you.
Okay, yes. Now, the president of the British Education Research Association was called Michael Bussey. And in about 1990, he actually answered that question by saying, look, action researchers, living theories, do not go with the the traditional view of generalizability, as if something applies to all, because that's not the form of the explanations that you generate as a living theory researcher. Now, the important thing is, Michael argued, and I agree, is relatability. We can demonstrate that individual living educational theories have been drawn on and used in different parts of the world. And this is what we're meaning by our understanding of generalizability. It is not applied to all from a general framework or general theory. It is demonstrating that ideas are being integrated within the creation of another living educational theory. And we can demonstrate that throughout the world. Okay, so don't use a positivist notion of generalizability as if your theory can apply to everybody, which is the traditional view of the general. I had a first degree in physical sciences, chemistry and physics, and that was the traditional view of theory. It applied to all, you know, it was general in that sense. A living educational theory is your explanation of your educational influence. Other people can demonstrate that they've drawn insights from your theory, and all of the living theories on the web that I put there, they indicate where they've drawn insights from other people. Am I making sense there? So your theory will be relatable. Yeah, okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Safwan. We actually, towards the end, we got about 5 minutes to go. So I would like to welcome anybody from the audience, from inside our chat room, the Zoom, to if you have any questions before I like sum up. Anyone from the group?
I think we have Ibrahim who has raised up their hand.
Okay. Please welcome, Mr. Ibrahim. Please also share where you're from and what are you teaching. Is he ready?
No, I don't think so. Maybe just a misclick.
Okay. So actually, Prof, I also I have this experience while in one of the international action research seminar in Sarawak. I was presenting action research. Actually, in the seminar, it is called Action Research International Seminar in Education, but actually most of the research I saw is not actually action research. And I met some professors from the local universities that shared action research. Some of them, they said, you have to have hypotheses when doing action research. I was not happy with that, you know, but they are all professors. But, you know, I got but I do not know how to really, you know, because I'm not a professor, he's a professor, and he's saying that action research, you need to have hypothesis. You know, how do you actually go about this, having to convince all these professors?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, this is a
very frustrating.
It's a very important question to do with what we call the politics of educational knowledge. That you'll find that if you engage in living theory research, you will have to engage with power relations. It's unavoidable. Now, you get some people, like those professors, talking about a hypothesis. Now, hypotheses usually come from positivist science. Okay,
Yeah.
now, action research is not a positivist science in the sense of controlled experimental designs, where you have got a causal relationship that says, if I do this, then that happens. Now, that is the traditional form of a hypothesis, the claim that if you do this, then that happens. But what I used to do with professors who would say the same thing is to say, using the action reflection cycle, which can actually be traced back to John Dewey, you can actually say in the action reflection cycle and the action planner, you could say that if I do this, then I believe that this will happen. And you can use that in the sense of a hypothesis. But it is different to the positivist scientist that I used to be, where you were asking about a causal relationship. In living theory and action research, relationships are intentional. Am I making sense here? That no matter what I do with you today, I cannot claim to be having a causal influence in your learning, because your creativity and originality will have to engage with what I'm saying in your own learning. So I have an intentional relationship, which is different than the traditional view of hypothesis testing from a positivist tradition. If I'm not making sense there, let me know and I can write further. You know, we can be in contact over the next weeks. Okay.
Yeah, because we have about few more minutes. I have a few questions here from the YouTube. One question from Muhammad Fazli. He said, how pandemic pedagogy affected action research values qualitative and quantitatively as a whole? Any theory will create? Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, I think the living theory research, because it focuses on your values as explanatory principles, brings into the universities new standards of judgment that I don't believe any of your universities and institutes will, I may be wrong here, but will not have had love as a motivating explanatory principle. That what this process does is transform what counts as educational knowledge in what we call the academy, and I'm using that globally. So by undertaking this kind of pedagogical inquiry into your teaching, you can examine your educational influence and make sure you put your values into what counts as educational learning. And that is what will actually transform higher education in Malaysia in terms of what counts as educational knowledge. It will be your values that you bring in as you improve your practice.
Okay, another question I would like to mention, because so many questions here from the viewers from the YouTube. It's about 120 people watching from the YouTube, Professor. Another question here by Wani, Cikgu Wani. Action research more prefer to how settle the issue of learning topic or general issue in class that can use in many subjects? I'm not sure what the question.
Yeah, yes, you can use this living theory approach to improving your practice within any subject, but you've just got to be careful here, because whilst you ask the question, how do I improve my practice and what I'm doing, that I used to be, as I say, a science teacher. Now, these, how do I improve what I'm doing, they go a little further than the science that I was teaching, because of the values that I hold as an educator. That it wasn't just sufficient, for example, to improve the mathematical understanding or the scientific understanding. That was part of it. But the important thing was to respond to what you see as the educational needs of your learners that actually often go beyond a subject in the curriculum, like maths, history, geography. Just see if I'm making sense there, because it's a very important question. Yeah.
Okay, Shafiq, because we only got two minutes. I think if Jack can like sum up today's presentation.
Yeah, with pleasure. I mean, mine is that I hope you will all create your own living posters and send them in so that we can add them to the ones that you've already got. on as the Malaysian, Educational Action Research or Living Theory group. Now, the vital thing is that you all ask yourselves, how do I improve what I'm doing? Go through the action reflection cycles, but produce the explanations of your educational influence in your own learning and the learning of others. That's where I would start. And then build 3 to 8 people from your group as part of a validation group to help you to improve the validity and rigor of your explanations. Okay?
Okay, thank you, Jack. Maybe Shafiq, before we end.
Yeah, I think I just would like to relate to what Prof Whitehead said about the oh sorry, I can't remember now. The very final one is very important. Is you really examine your practice. It's not looking at, for example, your student or your teaching pedagogies. It's all about how you hold your values. How would you like to improve the way that you as an educator in the classroom. So I think the very important question is that in this pandemic, for example, like we all have faces so many problems and disruption, but this is the great way really to start how you can create the action research project and hold those values that you really want to influence the education starting from your classroom itself.
Okay, thank you, Shafiq, because I think now with the pandemic, all of us need to unlearn and relearn and co-learn together to actually do something. You need to do intervention now to actually cope with this pandemic era. I really appreciate Professor Whitehead to be with us and talk about the living educational theory. And I really love the phrase, how do I improve my practice? Because in Islam, in our religion, we really focus on, we have to do better every day in such a ways that if we don't improve ourselves, that is very important. So I would like to say thank you again to all the participants and that joined our Zoom meeting today, and also for the viewers in the YouTube for joining us and giving many comments. Actually, I don't have the time to read them all. And thank you also for those participants and viewers that asked questions. And thank you very much to our co-researchers, Dr. Satira and Dr. Shafiq, especially for having effort to make this webinar a reality tonight. And I really appreciate and say thank you very much from all of us to Professor Whitehead for joining us, because now it's already over the time that we already planned. It's actually 1 hour program. So any last word maybe from anyone before I end? So I felt that I don't want to to end this program, but it's really the blessing in disguise, because of this pandemic we actually can be together in this webinar, because I've never used Zoom before, actually never used Google Meet. Because of this pandemic we are now having new skills, and it's actually this way is to improve our practice. This webinar is part of our action research project. Dr. Satira and Shafiq, actually in our way, hopefully from this research we can influence the educational educational practices in Malaysia, inshallah. So with that, I would like to say thank you again to everyone. Have a good night, and I hope Professor Whitehead thinks I will be doing okay in UK with the pandemic. Hope you stay healthy and hope continue to contribute to action research and motivate us all. And I'm so glad that my picture, I saw my picture just now and on the homepage of Living Educational Theory. I love it. And I think
thank you so
fall
much.
in love with action research day and every day. All right, with that, I thank you all, and I end with wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Thank you all.